Westport Library. Today's program will begin momentarily. Supported by Verso Studios, created locally and shared with the world.
Good evening. My name is Carrie, and I am part of the programming team here at the library, and it is my pleasure to welcome you and thank you for joining us tonight for a special screening of October 8, a powerful and deeply thought-provoking film that details what followed the October 7 Hamas-led attacks in Israel and points a critical lens on the rising tide of anti-Semitism happening across college campuses, social media, and our broader society. We are grateful tonight to our presenting partner, ADL Connecticut, and our event partners, Temple Israel, TCS, Chabad of Westport, the Fairfield Jewish Advocacy Coalition, the Jewish Federation of Greater Fairfield County, Temple Beth El Norwalk, Temple Shalom Norwalk, for helping make tonight possible. And we are so incredibly fortunate to be joined tonight by the film's director, Wendy Sachs, who will make a few brief comments before the film and then join us after the screening for an audience Q&A. Wendy is an Emmy award-winning television producer, a journalist, and the author of 2 critically acclaimed books. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, Fast Company, and CNN, and she is known for leading conversations that are as thoughtful as they are necessary. She's also the co-director of Surge, a documentary about women running for office in the wake of 2016. So please join me in welcoming Wendy Sachs.
Hello, Westport. Thank you for having me. I am the director of the film you're about to watch. As a documentary film director, I always like to tell the origin story of making a film. Documentaries are very personal, generally speaking. And so this one obviously began on October 7th, 2023. And I was visiting my daughter Lexi at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and it was game day, go Badgers. It was game day, and we woke up, it was a Saturday morning, and we woke up and we looked at our phones and we saw, the images coming out of southern Israel of babies and children and young people from the Nova Festival and grandparents being murdered, those murders being live streamed on people's Facebook feeds and on Telegram, and we saw people being kidnapped into Gaza. And I think as these images were unfolding, we weren't even sure just exactly how bad things were. We weren't sure what was going on, but something felt different. And it was really, though, the next day, on October 8th, when I saw what was happening in New York's Times Square, when we saw that Hamas was being celebrated as freedom fighters rather than as terrorists. And then later I heard that at Harvard that day, more than 30 student groups had signed onto a letter blaming Israel for the attack on itself. And then in the following days, it was campus after campus. It was Columbia and Barnard and Tulane and Cornell and NYU and Northwestern, my alma mater, where we saw all of this hate exploding. And so it was that sort of hostility meeting the silence coming from women's organizations. Where were they? Where was UN Women when we were hearing about women being raped and seeing these horrific photos? And it was the silence coming from the entertainment industry and Hollywood, those folks who were speaking out about every other social injustice. And we all remember Take Back Our Girls and Boko Haram. And it was the silence coming from Capitol Hill, from the Democrats, who so many of us support, and I had actually just done a film about a few years earlier, and from the people who I'd actually even followed in my film, silence. And to me, it felt like the world had lost its mind. And so a few weeks after the attack, I started putting together a treatment for the film. I wrote a treatment. I had done another independent film before. You heard in my bio, it was called Surge, and that was about the record number of first-time female candidates in the 2018 midterm elections. And after I'd done that film, and that was sold to Showtime, and it did pretty well, but I had promised myself I would never, ever again do an independent film alone. It is blood, sweat, and tears, and it is a terrible business model. And so I'm only gonna get hired by production companies, and that's what I did after that film. But here I was, and so I rate this treatment and I shop it around to these different production companies who I just recently worked, and everyone passed. No one was gonna touch it. And so I thought, okay, here we go again. And I started booking people for the film. And immediately at the end of October, I reached out to Congressman Richie Torres, who everyone should applaud for because he's amazing. And he said yes, Black, Latino, progressive, gay, and a Democrat, and unapologetically pro-Israel, and was calling out the double standards and the bias and the hypocrisy. And then I went to other people like Dan Senor, and my list went on and on. And ultimately, I reached out to Deborah Messing, the actress, because I saw what she was doing on her platform, again, unapologetically speaking out when so many other people were silent. And I asked Deborah if not only could I interview her for the film, but would she join me as an executive producer in the film, and ultimately she did. And I just kept going. I did more than 80 interviews and filmed for about 10 months. Only about 36 of those, or 37, made it into the film. And I was raising money for this film. It's a totally donor-funded film. And I want to give a shout out to two of my executive producers, Sarah and Brett Weiner, who are here in this room. Thank you, Sarah and Brett. They came on board really early on. I think it was December of 2023, based on a Zoom call and a deck with nothing else. And they believed in me, and I am so grateful. I am truly humbled by the support that I've had for this film. Everyone, said we're not going to touch this film. Hollywood rejected it, quietly supported it, but ultimately I had no representation. And people just said, good job. This is important. You go, girl. But sorry, can't take it on. And I met with every agency in Hollywood over the summer when I was making this film. But despite the fact that we had no representation, we did get distribution for this film. And not only that, we also ran an Academy Award campaign. So despite sort of all of the headwinds that we faced, I think that this film has resonated, and we opened in 137 screens across the country on March 14th, and AMC was carrying the film. Thank you. It's a really, 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 really big deal. So thank you to this community also for people who are buying out theaters. I cannot thank you enough. We were showing demand for this film in Hollywood, which is everything. And we opened theatrically in Canada about 2.5 weeks ago, and we got extended in Canada. In fact, I just came from Montreal because people have been protesting the film, and there's been sort of, if anyone's been following what's been happening in Montreal, there's sort of ground zero for anti-Semitism these days at McGill and Concordia, and I walked around McGill and Concordia 2 days ago to see it for myself and to support the students there. We also have distribution in Australia, and we have interest from around the world. I am just overwhelmed by the support and humbled by everyone who has supported the film and trusted me to make this, and now are out there supporting the film the way that they are. I've done a lot of really what I think are interesting things in my career. I worked on Capitol Hill, I worked in PR, I've worked in television, I've made films, I've done a lot of different things. But nothing is as meaningful and as important and as existential as this project. I have poured my life into this. I have given it everything I've got, and I literally feel like I have not slept in 18 months. I think even in the past 3 weeks, I was telling someone I was in 3 countries in like 12 cities in the past, 19 or 20 days. It's been bananas. I'm just running as fast as I can everywhere that I can to make sure that this film is seen, because it's so important that it's seen not just by the Jewish community, but more importantly, and I think you'll agree with me after you watch this, by the non-Jewish community. And that's where my focus is right now. So with that, I never like to tell people to enjoy the film, but I hope that you appreciate what we've done. It's ambitious. It's the scope is just robust. There's a lot jammed into 98 minutes, and we'll talk about it afterwards. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to the synagogues and to this whole community, and to Brett and Sarah who have supported the film. And I look forward to having a conversation with you afterwards. Thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I think this is going to be pretty informal. Honestly, we don't have a moderator. So I hope, is there someone who's going to be passing around a microphone? No, we have someone going up to, okay, we have a microphone up there. Okay. We can make this very conversational. If anyone wants to start lining up for questions.
Hi, folks. If you have a question and could please queue up, just because we are recording this, so we need to get your voice on the mic. You can start a line right here. Thanks so much.
I do ask for people to please frame it as a question. We get a lot of people who like to just sort of give a lot of commentary, but if you want to ask a question, I'd love to answer questions. Someone who's going to start? We have someone starting. Okay.
Do you think that, I know the movie is saying that it's coordinated, but do you think it's coordinated or it's just deep-seated anti-Semitism that came out?
It's definitely coordinated. And I think that's what the big revelatory scene in the film is really that the Marriott hotel room, the FBI wiretap, right? That's showing that Hamas has been in America for decades now. That wiretap is going back 30 years. That actually goes back to a time when Hamas wasn't designated as a terrorist organization yet in the United States. But the FBI was already following them and listening in on their conversations. And you can see in that scene, and of course we cut the scene way down, but you see how they're figuring out how they're going to message their way into America, how they're going to infiltrate institutions like the media and college campuses. They've been playing the long game. They knew exactly what they were doing. They are sophisticated, they're coordinated, they're connected to the Muslim Brotherhood. They have ties back to Hamas, right? So this is not just anti-Semitism bubbling over. This is a coordinated strategic campaign, which is why we showed that toolkit that came out on October 8th that I think a lot of people became familiar with, because it was the same language, the same iconography that was circulating on college campuses across SJP chapters. In fact, there's a couple lawsuits right now with SJP, with hostage families actually suing SJP, because in one case that's recently is coming out, where the hostage was hearing from his Hamas captors that they were talking to people on American college campuses on October 7th, letting them know what was happening. The coordination is real. This isn't just conspiracy theories.
Do you think that the funding of the universities by the government, focusing mostly on anti-Semitism, which is not the only reason to defund the universities, is going to create more anti-Semitism, and what can be done about it?
That's the big question. So you're talking about the Trump administration pushing back on and withholding the funds now from universities, and how that's going to create more anti-Semitism? Listen, I think there's people who, one thing I want to sort of just like set the table on, the film's not political, which I think is really important. It's not preachy, it's not ideological. We're not proselytizing, and I was really intentional about keeping it that way. I do get asked a lot of questions at these Q&As about my feelings about the Trump administration, and I try to stay away from that for a lot of reasons. But I think, listen, it's clear that they're coming down very hard on universities, and it's being impactful in certain ways. But we're also seeing the universities push back. So I think there's always a fear, to be honest, in the Jewish community to keep our heads down, because we're always afraid that there's going to be more anti-Semitism. The fact is, it's alive and well, whether we do nothing or whether we're loud. So I would argue that I think the administration is doing something to actually try to change what's been happening on campuses, because up until now they weren't doing anything about it. And even if so I do think it's really important. You know, I think we saw last year, after October 7th happened, you had a lot of donors, probably a lot of people in this room, who gave very charitably, very generously to their alma maters and stopped giving, right? And that still didn't do enough. The universities still weren't being held accountable, including my own alma mater, Northwestern, who has a Jewish president, and they just had more graffiti saying "Death to Israel." It's incredible. And I will tell you something else. I went to Northwestern to screen the film, and the president of the university, Michael Schill, who I don't know personally, emails me, because he was invited to the screening, emails me that he's very proud of me. He doesn't know me, but he's very proud of me for making this film, but he's really sorry he can't come to the screening. That's right. And you know who did show up? David Schwimmer, the actor, because he also went to Northwestern. So That's right. Give it up for David Schwimmer. And Michael Schill suggested that we have a private screening at his house. Yeah, so that's what's happening. And I do applaud the administration for taking some efforts. I might not personally agree with all of them, but I think that we need to be doing something.
First, thank you for making this film. It's my second time seeing the film, and it was harder, I think, to watch it second time around. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to ask, there's so many difficult things about this film, and I'm sure in making of the film, and so I'm curious for you, what was the hardest part about all this?
Oh, that's such a good question. Really getting it down to a manageable size that people would watch. I have 170 hours of footage. That's insane, you guys. 170 hours. I did more than 80 interviews. My interviews were like 90 minutes long. So really paring that down into something that's manageable and that my own kids would watch. So the pacing of it is just, it's brisk, it moves, this film moves. And so I am hearing from people that they've seen it 2 and 3 times. So thank you guys who are seeing it. My friend Heather, who's sitting here in this audience, has seen this. I think that's her 3rd time. But I do think when you watch it, even the 2nd and 3rd time, it's not boring because you're picking up on more stuff. There's just so much jammed in there. So the hardest part was really cutting it down and, losing a lot of really beautiful moments. There's a lot of beautiful moments, even with Deborah, that we had to cut. Other great stories with college students, and we went with the most compelling ones. But other people could argue others were equally as compelling. So that was what I found to be the hardest. It wasn't that it was personally taxing on me, it was more about managing the material.
Thank you so much for this incredibly brave and honest and truthful film. My question has to do as a Jewish professor at a Catholic university with some very brave students here who are Jewish leaders at their Catholic university, whether you considered in your research or thought at all about Jewish students in interfaith contexts, for example, Catholic colleges, and kind of how they were experiencing their Judaism after in the context of being at other faith schools.
Not really, to be honest. I think we were just focused on, I just came again from Canada, and people have asked, why weren't you here in McGill? Why weren't you here in Concordia? Why weren't you following everything that's happening? I was following really what was happening. I was doing this through the lens of an American diaspora Jew, and I was following the campuses that were sort of the hottest, right? So the Columbias, and we were really looking at the places, MITs, and we're also following some of the student activists where they were, because their stories, and we're going to trace back to their universities. So there's such a vast amount of experience that happened, but that was just not one sector that I focused on.
Thank you.
Hi, I've also seen it a few times now, and I'm blown away, but I have 2 questions. First of all, I'm having so much trouble getting an IMDb review that will be put up on the site. Do you know if there are any keywords that they're just automatically rejecting?
I don't know, but we keep hearing this. And so for IMDb, that's a film review site, and obviously those numbers, those ratings really impact how a film is perceived, that and Rotten Tomatoes. And we've had issues on both with trolls just trashing us. And it's like whack-a-mole. We send out these viral videos asking people to go into IMDb and give us like the highest rating, only to hear that people's reviews aren't being taken. Anything that seems to be if you're a fan of the film, it's not being posted. If you are, against this film, they're going to gladly take the review. So I truly don't know what's happening. I wish I could give some advice. Our distributor has been posting complaints to IMDb. They're owned by Amazon. I don't have an answer, but thank you for trying, and I'm going to report back that it's still an ongoing issue.
Yeah, I'll keep trying. But I have one more question. So, which of the bigger colleges have now screened the film, and is it being brought in through Hillel or Chabad, or is it the administration? Like, where is it being received where it needs to be received?
That's a great question. So getting onto college campuses is obviously a huge mission of this, of the film. So it was, first of all, getting into theaters, getting onto streaming. So we're on the paid video on demand platforms. that was like the sort of first phase, and getting onto college campuses is the next one, although I've been sort of doing it simultaneously. I think I've been to 6 or 7 colleges. So I started with Michigan. I've been to Michigan, Duke, Emerson, UT Austin, Harvard, Northwestern. I think I'm missing, I might be missing a few. We're going to Cornell. There's a whole rollout. We have not been invited by the administrations. We have been invited by the Jewish community, which is really unfortunate. And the campuses that tried to bring in other student groups, like the Christian students on campus, for example, no one seems to be biting at that. Today, before I came here, after Boston, I was in Hartford, and I had a 5-hour meeting with a group of people to try to figure out how to get this into Connecticut public schools, and how to get onto college campuses, and how to go to UConn and bring in like the greater UConn administration. I think it's really, really important. We're just not quite there yet. I will tell you, I have been reached out to by the Trump administration, who wants college presidents and trustees to see this film. So that's the long tail mission of the project, is to get it to the people and the people in charge who need to see this.
How about in Israel?
In Israel. We're going there also. We will be on streaming in Israel. I'm going to be in the Jerusalem Film Festival. And I am donating this film to the National Library of Israel, which is like their Library of Congress. So they are going to house all 170 hours of footage. Thank you. It's going to be in the digital archives. It's an unbelievable brand new museum. The National Library has been around, but the building in Jerusalem is brand new. It's high tech. So all of these uncut interviews that I have, and all the footage is going to be available for students and historians, for the public, for posterity.
I also want to thank you for making this film, this poignant and important film, and all of the effort you've put into it. I worry that somewhere on the other side, there's somebody else making a film from another point of view, from the Hamas point of view. I worry, given the infrastructure and the resources that they have, that there's somebody that would be trying to do what you're doing from that point of view. As a film professional who works around the world, do you know anything about that? Can we expect some kind of hideous converse to this film in the future? Do you know anything about that?
There is a film called The Encampments that's coming out right now. So yes, and it's being produced by Watermelon Pictures, by the Hadids. There are lots of those films out there, to be honest. But The Encampments is probably the counter to what we're showing happened on college campuses. My feeling are the people who are really sort of hardcore haters, they're going to continue to hate. That's not who I'm trying to target. I'm trying to reach the people, I'd say the 70% in the middle, the people who don't know very much. And what I am very, I would say, optimistic about are that there are a lot of those people out there. The haters are going to hate, as Taylor Swift says, but then there's so many people in the middle who I'm trying to reach. But we are outnumbered. We are outnumbered in the film world by these films. I will tell you, we were shut out of every major film festival. You know who got in? All of the Palestinian films. All of them. Okay? So when I say we have been swimming upstream, I am not exaggerating. I will tell you, and I was not going to do the film festival route because knowing what I know about the film world and knowing what I know about the antipathy towards Israel, I thought we're never going to get in. But in September of 2024, someone reached out to one of my editors who curates for the Woodstock Film Festival, which is not one of the biggest, but it's well known. And they said, we're looking for some 10/7 films. Why don't you submit? And we said, okay. And we submitted, and the film was pretty much done. It was pretty much what you saw, which is a premium film and should be in any film festival. And it was rejected. And after it was rejected, I got an email from one of the young men who curates for the film festival. He's Brooklyn, progressive guy. And he emailed me, and he said, your film should have been accepted. Call me if you want to know why it wasn't. And we had a conversation, and it started what I sort of imagined was happening in the independent film world, in which we found out is true, that they just summarily rejected it because it seemed too sympathetic, too pro-Israel, too political. And he said to me, it's a big problem. They took the Bibi files, which is an easy one to take because it's like so anti-Bibi, which, by the way, that film has no distribution right now. But they rejected ours. And that happened at South by Southwest. It happened at Sundance. It happened at Berlinale. And the list goes on. We were obviously in every Jewish major film festival. When we were doing our Academy run, and I said to you before, I'll tell you like a story about this, we became Academy Award eligible, which is like a big deal. And it happened at the last minute, which means that we screened on for a week and certain theaters in Los Angeles. And I was encouraged to do this Academy run, which I thought was like really sort of audacious of me. But after we premiered in LA in October, people said, this is such a good film, you should really go for it. And we said, okay. And what you do is there's about 700 documentary branch voters. Those are the people who vote for the Academy Awards for documentaries. And about half of them, so about 350 of them, live overseas. Most of them are in Europe. And I was able to get a list of those names. And if you go through the list of names, you can sort of identify, stereotypically, where people are ideologically. And the independent film world is very, very left-leaning, very, very woke. So I already know, okay, there's a lot of voters who just by, who they are, and if you Google them and look on their Instagram profiles, you can see what they represent and what they might not be fans of this film. But what you do to sort of campaign is it's very specific, and you send out these email blasts, and they go through an organization called the IDA, that's the International Documentary Association. So my publicist arranged for our email blasts, and I think they were supposed to go out like on a Tuesday and a Thursday. And all of a sudden on that Tuesday morning, I heard, oh, sorry, your email campaign blasts aren't going out. There's no room for them. And I was like, what does that mean? And I thought my publicist had made a mistake. Like I'd never done this before. Only for us to learn, and she said, well, this is crazy. This has never happened to us before. Of course, we blocked up this time. We paid the money. It's all good. Only for us to learn that the head of the IDA is on the other side of the issue and didn't want our campaign ads to go out anywhere. And then we also found out that We Will Dance Again, the documentary about the Nova Festival, they had already been sending out their campaign ads. They were ahead of us, and they were stopped sort of mid-campaign. So there were then some stories coming out about this, and I didn't want us to be part of that story because I was still looking for distribution. So I even kept my head down then. I didn't want to scream anti-Semitism when I'm in the middle of trying to find my own distribution for the film. Like, to me, that was more important. Now I'm very open about what happened because we're being shut out of also some independent theater chains that are showing No Other Land and showing The Encampments and The Teacher and these other Palestinian films, but won't show our film. So there is just an insidious problem in the independent film community. I would say it also exists in Hollywood, but Hollywood's a little bit different in that all of these agents who I'd reached out to and people who I'd met with and people who I still continue to talk to say, it's not you, it's not the film, it's the people they represent. It's these agents who represent actors in Hollywood who are on the other side of the issue. And so they don't want to represent something that's going to be polarizing for their clients. I mean, it's wild. So this whole like trope that Jews run Hollywood, it's like, really? Where is everyone right now?
Hi, thank you for sharing the film with us. After some fairly difficult and dark material for almost all of the film, you chose to end with a little bit of the music changed and we had a note of optimism. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to your directorial decision around that and also kind of where's your head on the optimism meter right now?
It's a great question. After so much darkness, I did not want people to feel like they were going to jump out of a window at the end of this film. I needed to, you really do want to end on hope. And I do think that there's hope. I don't think we manufactured that. I think that it exists. But I'll tell you a little secret about our ending. When I interviewed Deborah, I interviewed her in December of 2023. She had just come back from her very first trip to Israel. Believe it or not, she'd never been to Israel before, even though she had been talking about and standing up for the Israelis and calling for a return of the hostages and all of that. She'd actually never visited Israel before. And after she had her trip and I interviewed her, and she ends, as you hear in her soundbite, on Hatikva, and it's very beautiful, it's very kumbaya. And when I did that interview with her, I knew I had the ending for the film. I knew I had it just like 2 months into making this film. I was like, I have my soundbite, I know my ending. I knew my open also in January with the Rit Lahav and Neuros, and I was like, oh my gosh, I know how we're gonna open, I know how we're gonna end. But then we were showing the film, doing rough cut screenings and fine cut screenings in Los Angeles sort of all summer long. And I'd invite different people into the screenings, and I'd invite non-Jews into the screenings. And one of the people who I trusted was one of my DPs, one of my cameramen, a guy named Cameron, who's Australian, not Jewish, late 30s. And he's sitting through the film and he's crying at the end, and we had the original soundbite from Deborah. But the original soundbite, she does talk about, you know, the Hatikva and all of that, but she's also saying we. When we Jews basically see the writing on the wall, we come together, we stand up, we fight back, we. And he said, you had me up until the end. You had me. Now I feel like I'm not part of the group. Now I feel like I'm outside of the tent. And I thought, wow, that's such an insightful comment that we had him until we lost him, because now we're just talking about we Jews. And so we also knew we had Richie, and we had this sort of Black Jewish alliance, and we had these other things built in, and we had allyship as part of this ending. But I talked to Deborah and I said, you know what, we want to retweak that original soundbite of yours to make it more inclusive. You know, what do you think? And she said, of course. So we basically retracked her soundbite, and we, you know, merged together her Hatikva piece of it, but then we also added the new bite, making it sort of more inclusive. And that was very, very important, because we want the takeaway to be about allyship. And it needs to be about, we can't do this together. You know, we have to do this, you know, with others, and we can't do it alone. But I would say that my optimism is not just about the allyship, because allies are standing up and they're coming to screenings. And in Montreal, we had one of our screenings and no one was Jewish in the room. It was like MPs, it was members of parliament and allies and indigenous people. It was beautiful. And people are really showing up and showing their support. But to me, what's hopeful are these young people in the film, the Tessa Wexlers in the film. I mean, these young people are extraordinary. They are so brave, and they have such a strong sense of identity and purpose, and they're doubling down, and they're courageous, and they give me a lot of hope. And I've seen it even with my own college-age kids in their early 20s. You know, there is something that happened after October 7th where I think a lot of young people have a stronger sense of their identity. And I know that's not the case for everyone, and I had plenty of people and parents come up to me saying, oh my God, my kid's on the other side. They went to Jewish camp, we did all the things. What do I do now? And they were like freaking out that their kids were hanging out at the encampments. So I know that's not all young Jewish people, but I am optimistic and hopeful by the ones who I'm seeing who are really speaking out. And they're not quiet, and I think we've been quiet for too long.
Great film. Thank you so much for making it. Going to the allyship is a very good segue for my question, which is, as you mentioned earlier, it's so important for non-Jews and people from other perspectives to see this film. What percentage to date of your audiences do you think have been Jewish? Like, looking at this room, it seems dominantly Jewish. But what percentage would you say is not Jewish, and what efforts are being made to bring it to those non-Jewish audiences?
Well, that's a perfect segue to my impact campaign. I don't know what percentage. You know, we were screening on screens across America. We're not doing exit surveys to find out, how you identify, so I don't know. What I can tell you is that the long tail mission of the film is to get this into outside of the Jewish world. And so I'm raising money for our impact campaign and for education. And the impact campaign means I'm hiring an impact campaign producer who does these conversations with the Black community and the evangelical community and the Catholic community and all of that. That is the point of this film, is to get it outside and create all of those conversations. And there's a lot of interest in that, and to put it into education. Public schools, like I said, I was having a 5-hour meeting earlier today about how we started in Connecticut public schools, but getting it into the bigger world. That, to me, is the mission of this film. So I can't tell you numbers of how many non-Jews have seen it so far, but the goal is for many, 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 many non-Jews and young people to see the film.
Thank you for this excellent, excellent film. As I was standing here, I kept editing what I should include, what I should leave out. But I wanted to say to everyone that I have my PhD from Yale. I get the Yale Daily News every day, and while all of this was going on, I was reading it, and I could not believe that things like when it came time for exams, the students in the law school, the Yale Law School, students in the law school had to read certain books, and there were only a certain number of copies. And so what non-Jewish students did, who were pro-Hamas, one person would return the book, and they would have someone directly behind him to take the book out. So the Jewish students never got to read the books. This happened not only at the law school, but also at the undergraduate school. There was a big event in a room that held about 300 people that dignitaries come and speak at. And the Jewish students were, and it was about this subject, Jewish students were not allowed to enter into the room at all. And I could go on, but I will close by saying that the Yale, two things. The Yale College Council passed a resolution, as you had shown in your film, saying that Yale should divest itself from anything having to do with Israel, both exchange of university presidents from the law school and the medical school, and also to just completely divest itself. And this was then voted on by the student population, and 80% of the students at Yale, the undergraduates, and they're more than 20% Jewish students, so some of the Jewish students had to vote for it, voted in favor of what the College Council was doing. And I will close by saying that the immediate past president of Yale is a direct descendant of the Grand Rebbe Soloveitchik. And one day I was walking one way and he was walking the other, and so I stopped and I said, well, I'd like to think of you sometimes as the Grand Rebbe of Yale. And so he started laughing and he said, that's one of the nicest compliments I've ever received. And I said, great, thank you. Well, while all of this was going on, he never did anything. So I hope when you come to Connecticut, you get to show this film at Yale as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing film. I'm going to make sure everybody I know sees it. Question really has to do with comment Michael Rappaport made, and I'm wondering if you had conversations with him, with Deborah Messing, why there weren't other or aren't more famous Jewish people in the entertainment industry speaking up, doing something, maybe even, why wouldn't they get behind the film earlier in your distribution efforts? Spielberg, Geffen, all of the people whose names we know. I was wondering if you had any information about that.
They're cowards. I mean, they just are. Full stop. I mean, Michael gave me such a great interview. He's only in there for a couple of minutes. There's so much funny stuff that he said and tragic stuff that he said. But he even said, where's Adam Sandler? All Adam Sandler needed to do was go up on that stage at that Israel rally where Michael spoke and Deborah spoke and play a song on his guitar, and everyone would have been madly in love. But he couldn't even do that. right? And he had his the bat mitzvah movie had just come out. You know, his entire career has been built, not his entire career, but a large part of the career has been built on like the Jewish stuff and making fun of it and like leaning into it. When it works for him, he's all in, right? Very, very upsetting. I mean, we saw like people like Amy Schumer, who was very vocal and very loud, and then her agent and manager told her to get quiet. She had a series coming out. And that's sort of what happened. David Schwimmer also was sort of out there at first and then very quiet. He and I met for a coffee back in January for a couple of hours. And he, is really into now being loud and proud. But I think that there was a lot of pressure. I mean, listen, even Deborah Messing gets pressure from her manager and her people that to be careful, because it's her career. So people are afraid of losing their followers. That's what Deborah would tell you. They're afraid of losing their Instagram followers. I mean, that's because followers mean money, and they're worried about their careers. But why people like, Steven Spielberg is like not speaking out, I do not know. I speak to his sister, Nancy, who's in the documentary film world. She loves the film. I spoke to another one of his sisters early on. But I don't know, except, people let, there's a book that maybe some of you have heard about, Dara Horn's book, People Love Dead Jews. If you do something about the Holocaust and they're dead, then you can win an Academy Award like, the Jesse Eisenberg film, it can get nominated. But when you're alive, Jesse won't mention the word the Holocaust or talk about October 7th. When it's convenient for them, that's when they talk about it. But they're cowards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Let's give Wendy one last round of applause. Thank you so much for being here, for fitting us into your extremely busy schedule. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and I hope you have a safe night getting home. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.